46. A worthless piece of paper bonus. Hawk's answer was immediate. No hesitation. Gwen was clearly happy with his answer. The sound of her voice became lighter, more cheerful. A little while later, the new couple finally finished their call, reluctantly hanging up. It was mostly Gwen who was reluctant to hang up. Hawk was, well, alright. He was a little reluctant too. But Hawk understood why. Despite having a crush on Gwen since freshman year, he had waited until now to finally acknowledge it. In a word, before, he hadn't been worthy. Now, he was. Whether it was to keep getting stronger, or just to hold on to the feeling of being worthy, Hawk knew he couldn't afford to get complacent. He had to work even harder than before. He might be strong now, but if he slacked off, how long would it last? A year, 2 or 3. The curtain on the Marvel Universe had been raised. Hawk didn't just feel a lack of desire to relax, he felt a pressing, urgent need to push forward. So, after he hung up with Gwen, he began his 10,000 punch routine for the day. At this point, hitting a heavy bag was pointless. But he wasn't really hitting the bag. He was using the repetitive, meditative motion to quiet his mind, to find a stillness in which he could search for that elusive sixth sense, the one he knew was there, but could never seem to grasp. On the rooftop of his apartment building. The heavy bag, hanging from a clothesline pole, swayed gently with each of Hawk's punches. Hawk's eyes were unfocused, his mind adrift, feeling as if he were searching for a single grain of rice in an infinite, starless void. Until he heard it. Faint, distant screams. His focus snapped back to reality. He turned, his eyes automatically locking onto the source of the sound, the Williamsburg Bridge. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Space itself seemed to contract before his eyes. In the blink of an eye, Hawk, standing several miles away, could see the scene unfolding on the Williamsburg Bridge with perfect clarity. The Williamsburg Bridge, connecting Manhattan and Brooklyn, was a major artery. Every day, thousands of people crossed it to get to their jobs in the city and back to their homes in the outer boroughs. Except now, something had gone terribly wrong. Countless white-collar workers, their cars trapped in a massive traffic jam, were now running for their lives, their screams mixing with the sound of cars being overturned behind them. And then Hawk saw it. A massive, hulking creature, covered in grayish-green scales, with the head of a lizard, was leaping from car to car. As it moved, its long, powerful tail whipped out, grabbing cars and flinging them into the air as if they were toys. It seemed to be looking for something. As that. The lizard. Hawk's brow furrowed. And then, another thought hit him. Well, shit. There goes my letter of recommendation. NYU might accept a letter of recommendation from a respected scientist like Dr. Connors, but they sure as hell weren't going to accept one from the lizard. In the span of a few seconds, the letter of recommendation in his apartment had gone from a priceless asset to a worthless piece of paper. Not even the stock market crashed that hard. Soon. The lizard, making its grand debut on the bridge, seemed to have found what it was looking for. Its tail shot out and snatched a man in a business suit from his car. The middle-aged man, clutching a briefcase that likely contained the serum meant for the military hospital, trembled as the lizard's cold, green eyes stared him down. He managed to stammer out a single word. Arg. Squelch. Before the man could finish his sentence, the lizard swiped the briefcase from his hands. With a flick of its tail, it sent the man flying into the bridge's guardrail. The next second, a support cable caught the man at the waist, slicing him in two. His bisected body rained blood as it tumbled into the river below. But just then, Spider-Man. No. The spider made his grand entrance. Swinging on a web line, Peter Parker maneuvered his body in midair, brought his feet together, and shot forward like a cannonball, slamming into the lizard just as it was about to turn and leave. The lizard staggered from the impact. It regained its footing, turned, and let out a guttural roar at Peter, who was now crouched atop a car, his green tongue lashing through the air. Peter shot a web, snagging the briefcase. The lizard roared with rage and began to hurl cars at him. The battle between the spider and the lizard had begun. Standing on his rooftop, Hawk watched, thoroughly entertained. But then, he remembered something. He turned back to his heavy bag, his body becoming a blur as a storm of phantom fists rained down upon it. 30 seconds later. His 10,000 punches for the day were complete. He let out a breath, then turned back to the bridge, ready to enjoy the show. However, where's the lizard? Where's the spider? Where did they go? Hawk stared at the now empty bridge, confused. Then he noticed a disturbance in the water below. Beneath the surface, a dark shadow was moving with incredible speed. Peter, swinging through the city in pursuit, finally lost track of the lizard somewhere near Roosevelt Island. It was too dark, and the lizard was simply too fast underwater. Peter came to a stop on the roof of a skyscraper, shaking his head as he stared at the spot where he'd lost the trail. Just as he was about to head home, his spider sense tingled. He moved to the edge of the roof and saw him standing on the roof of a 10-story building not far away. Hawk. He smiled and gave the crouching figure of Spider-Man a little wave. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 4 comments 0 vote. 47 The Scent of Hawk bonus. Thank you for 1,300 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. With a single, graceful swing, Peter landed squarely on the rooftop of Hawk's apartment building. Whoa, Spider. Hawk, who had been about to speak, stopped short as the hero ripped off his mask, revealing his true face. A look of mock surprise crossed Hawk's features. Peter just gave him a shy smile. He finally understood what Gwen had been talking about. Hawk, you're a terrible actor. Am I? Hawk blinked, then saw the dead serious nod from Peter and just shrugged. Alright, I'll work on it. If one person says you're a bad actor, it might just be their opinion. But if 2 people say it. Hawk made a mental note to practice his surprised face in the mirror. Peter chuckled, then his expression turned serious as he brought up their recent encounter. So, did you see what happened back there? Parts of it. But by the time I got a good look, you and that lizard guy were already gone. Hawk was telling the truth. No big deal. It would be all over the news tomorrow. Everyone knew how fast the New York media worked. Less than 3 minutes after the lizard had first appeared on the Williamsburg Bridge, Hawk had already counted 3 different news helicopters circling overhead. Quote. Peter's eyes widened at Hawk's words. He glanced around, then looked toward the Williamsburg Bridge, which was barely a speck in the distance. From this far away, Peter looked back at Hawk, his expression one of pure shock. Hawk just smiled. My eyesight's pretty good. But then again, so is yours. Peter nodded slowly. It was true. If he really focused, he could probably make out the details on the bridge from here. A thought suddenly struck him. Then did you see where he went? Nope. Damn. Peter sighed. I didn't expect him to be so strong. He just threw me off. By the time I recovered, he had already jumped into the river. Hawk's curiosity was piqued. What's your take on him? Power-wise. Peter looked at Hawk, thought for a moment, and then frowned. He's stronger than me, but not as fast or agile. But in the water, he's way faster. Got it. Own punch material. I wouldn't even need to burn my Cosmo. Hawk processed Peter's assessment, gave a slight nod, and was about to head back inside. But then, Peter seemed to remember something and said to Hawk, actually, that lizard felt familiar somehow. I was trying to figure out what that feeling was when he threw me. Hawk paused and looked at Peter. And did you figure it out? Yeah. Peter nodded, then just stared at Hawk. Hawk waited, but when Peter didn't continue, it finally clicked. You're saying me? Yeah. That's impossible. The idea was absurd. How could the lizard have his scent on him? He had only been to Dr. Connors's lab once. And even if some trace had been left behind from a handshake, that was over 2 months ago. There was no way it would still be there. He wasn't a goddess, and Dr. Connors wasn't some simp who'd refused to wash his hand for a month after shaking mine. But Peter was insistent. The last time I was this close to you was in the old gym. I remember your presence, your scent or whatever. It's distinct. The trace on that lizard creature was faint, almost unnoticeable. If it wasn't, I wouldn't have taken so long to place it. Hawk frowned. You're sure? I'm sure. Peter nodded, then thought again. It was like he had been in contact with you, so a trace of you was left on him. Kind of like how Gwen has a trace of your presence on her, but the one on Gwen is way stronger. That description cleared everything up. He had been wondering what Peter was getting at. So that was it. Hawk let out a small laugh. Okay. In that case, I think I know who he is. Peter's eyes went wide. Who? Dr. Kurt Connors. He's the head of the regeneration lab at Oscorp. Gwen was just there yesterday. And his entire research is based on lizard DNA. If Peter had just said the lizard smelled like him, he would have been stumped. But using Gwen as a comparison was the key. If his own presence was as a 1, then Gwen, who spent so much time with him, would probably carry around a 0.5. And since Gwen worked at Oscorp, that would explain how such a faint trace ended up there. Peter's jaw dropped as Hawk revealed the lizard's identity. It's him. You know him. Yeah, I think I met him once with my dad, a long time ago. Right. Now that the mystery of the lingering trace was solved, Hawk was completely at ease. He let out a yawn. Well, it's getting late. I'm going to bed. Okay. Peter had wanted to discuss the threat the lizard posed, but seeing Hawk's dismissive attitude, he let it go. Good night, Hawk. Good night, Spider. I'm not a spider. You sure? Hawk, who had already started to walk away, turned back, a playful, smartass grin on his face. Go on. Tell me where the webs come from. Peter's mouth opened, then closed. His expression turned serious. Good night, Hawk. Good night, Peter. Hawk didn't tease him any further. A moment later, Peter was gone, swinging off into the night. Hawk went back inside, finished his fried chicken, took a cold shower, and collapsed into bed. Meanwhile, deep beneath the streets of Queens, in the labyrinthine network of sewer tunnels that served as a winter home for the city's homeless, a sound echoed. A primal, bestial roar echoed from the darkness. Gradually, the roars grew weaker. Until finally, the roaring stopped, and in its place, a human groan of agony could be heard. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 7 comments 0 vote. 48 The lizard is trending bonus. Thank you for 1400 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Unsurprisingly, the next day, the lizard monster from the Williamsburg Bridge was the only thing anyone was talking about. Holy shit, did you guys see the news this morning? Yeah. Thank God I live in Queens. My family could never afford a place in Brooklyn or Manhattan. You know, I'm starting to think we should all just leave New York after graduation. Why? Think about it. A few years ago, it was the Hulk and the Abomination. Last year, that Stark Expo disaster. This year, we get aliens. And now, before the year's even over, we've got a giant lizard monster. Damn, he's got a point. What the hell is wrong with New York these days? It's been cursed ever since 9/11, man. Okay, but am I the only one who wants to know how that Spider-Man guy does the web thing? Quote. Sitting in the back of the bus, Hawk heard the quiet question and raised an eyebrow. He glanced at Peter sitting next to him. See. Peter felt the teasing look and just sighed. I don't want to talk about it. Hawk just shrugged, then smoothly changed the subject, glancing at the empty seats around them. Where's Harry? He's not riding with you today. He had to go to Oscorp this morning. Said there was a break-in last night. Peter lowered his voice, scanning the other students on the bus. I asked him about it. It was Dr. Connors' lab that got hit. He said the lizard guy cleaned the place out, took all the equipment. Hawk nodded. I'm surprised New York's friendly neighborhood Spider-Man wasn't on the scene. Peter's jaw tightened. Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man needs to sleep. He was suddenly very grateful for the mask. Look at this. The one person who knew his secret, a guy who was just as introverted as he was already dissing him. Imagine if anyone else found out. Besides, he was trying to do good. Uncle Ben would be proud of him. With great power comes great responsibility. But, even with great power, you still need to sleep. Even actual spiders needed to rest every now and then. He couldn't be on patrol 24/7. Peter pushed the thought aside and leaned in, continuing their conversation from the night before in a low whisper. So, what do you think Connors is trying to do? Don't know. Don't care. Not my problem. Hawk replied with a dismissive three-part combo. Peter watched as Hawk, having said his piece, returned to his usual stoic silence, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery. He opened his mouth to say more, but then closed it. He wasn't about to ask Hawk to join him on his crusade. Just because it was his passion didn't mean it had to be anyone else's. Peter understood that much. At school, the buzz about the lizard was even more intense. Gossip and rumors flew through the halls, fueled by the overactive hormones of 1,000 teenagers. At lunch, Hawk, who had gotten his usual burger and Coke, was just starting to eat when Gwen, late from class, sat down across from him. Just got the news. I don't have to go into Oscorp for a while. Dr. Connors's lab was robbed by the lizard man, and Dr. Connors himself is missing. Ah. Hawk looked up. He thought for a moment, then leaned in, his voice low. It wasn't some lizard man who robbed the lab, Gwen. It was Connors. He had been planning to tell her this morning. But Mary Jane had been with her, and Hawk hadn't wanted to say anything in front of her. Now was as good a time as any. Gwen's eyes went wide. She gasped, her chest rising and falling in a sudden, sharp breath. She quickly remembered they were in the crowded cafeteria and kept her voice down, her eyes wide as she stared at Hawk, who had already gone back to eating his burger. What? Dr. Connors is? Are you serious? 99% sure. Spider-Man said the lizard had my scent on him, but it was faint. Spider-Man. Yep. Hawk nodded casually. Gwen stared at him, her mind reeling. If her eyes could have gotten any wider, they would have. You know Spider-Man? Yes. Who is he? Can't say. Hawk shook his head. He wasn't about to give up Peter's secret. Telling Gwen about Connors was one thing. The lizard was a direct threat to her. But Peter was different. Especially this version of Peter, the original one. The one whose idea of going dark was getting a bad haircut, asking for a raise, and putting some dirt in his rival's eye. Besides, Peter hadn't told anyone about his powers. So, he was going to return the favor. Hawk met Gwen's unblinking stare with a small smile. You can stare at me all you want. I'm not going to tell you. Gwen finally looked away. Fine. I'll just figure it out myself. Again, she knew Hawk's social circle was practically non-existent. If Hawk knew Spider-Man, chances are, she knew him too. She was confident she could solve this. As her mind began to race through a list of potential candidates, she leaned in again, her voice a whisper. But, how did Dr. Connors become that thing? Hawk shook his head. Only God knows. The last time I talked to him, he told me his regeneration serum had worked on a mouse. He only bothered to think about it because it was Gwen asking. If it had been Peter, he wouldn't have wasted the brain cells. Even if the lizard tore New York City in half, it wasn't his problem. There were other people who would be far more concerned about it than him. He looked up and saw Gwen's eyes go wide with a new, dawning horror. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. #bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. #add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 4 comments 0 vote. 49 Hawk blood analysis bonus. Thank you for the 1500 ps milestone, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. What did you just say? I don't know. No, you just said the experiment succeeded with what? A mouse with a severed tail. Didn't I tell you about that last time? Hawk frowned, looking at Gwen's stunned expression. What's wrong? Gwen didn't answer. Her brow was furrowed in thought. A successful experiment. A mouse with a severed tail. For some reason, an image flashed in Gwen's mind. 2 months ago, after the lab accident, a small white mouse had escaped its cage and licked up the drops of blood Hawk had left on the floor. If her memory served her correctly, that mouse was missing its tail. Hiss. Gwen drew in a sharp breath. She glanced at Hawk, then pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed a number. Sitting across from her, Hawk's eyebrows shot up. A moment later, the call connected. Hello, Elsa. Gwen, are you calling to ask what happened? I'm sorry, the company made us all sign NDAs. No, that's not it, Elsa. I wanted to ask, the doctor's successful experiment, was it on a mouse with a severed tail? Yeah, it was. Elsa, who was still at Oscorp having just signed her non-disclosure agreement, nodded on the other end of the line. But you can't really call it a success. It only worked that one time. We've been trying to replicate it ever since, but we keep failing. Gwen pressed on, her voice urgent. Was it the mouse that escaped its cage that day? Yeah, that's the one. I knew it. Gwen thought to herself. She exchanged a few more pleasantries with Elsa and then hung up. Hawk watched her, his curiosity piqued. Was there something special about that mouse? Gwen put her phone away and looked at Hawk. She considered her words carefully. Do you remember the accident in the lab? Yeah, I remember. Your hand was injured. You were bleeding, right? No. Hawk shook his head without hesitation. Gwen said nothing. She just stared at him. Hawk met her gaze, held it for a moment, and then sighed. Okay, fine. Let's say I was bleeding. Go on. Gwen's stare was intense. The drops of blood you left on the floor, that mouse licked them up. Quote. Hawk's brow furrowed as he looked at Gwen. Gwen looked right back at him. Their eyes locked. Hawk broke the gaze first, drawing in a slow breath. You think the successful test subject was the same mouse you saw that day? Gwen shrugged. It's the only variable. Otherwise, why would the doctor run so many animal trials, with only that one mouse surviving? She didn't understand the connection, not really. But, in her mind's eye, she saw it again. The image of a waterfall in the deep Maryland woods, raging in reverse, defying gravity. And Hawk, standing at the center of it all, the cause of the impossible. Hawk remained silent. He quietly set down the large soda cup he'd been holding and folded his hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. He thought about what Peter had told him on the rooftop last night. The lizard has your scent. At the time, Hawk had assumed it was just because Gwen had been near Dr. Connors. But now, it seemed he was wrong. The lab accident, he'd bled. The escaped mouse with the severed tail had ingested his blood and become the sole survivor of an experiment that had killed every other subject. Dr. Connors had then used that mouse to create a new serum. And then, Dr. Connors became the lizard. Hawk frowned, staring at Gwen, who was watching him with an unblinking gaze. He opened his mouth to speak, then just shook his head, a look of disbelief on his face. My blood can't be that special, can it? There's one way to find out. What? The school's Stark Hall has a blood analyzer. We could get the results in half an hour. Quote. Stark Hall was the nickname for the school's Building 3, the experimental science wing donated by Howard Stark. Most of the equipment inside was state-of-the-art, also donated by Stark Industries. That included the fully automated, rapid blood analysis machine, a device that looked like it cost $100,000 but was actually worth over $1 million, complete with a gleaming Stark logo. Hawk stuck his finger in his mouth. When he pulled it out, the small pinprick had already healed over. Gwen had already booted up the machine. It whirred to life. As they waited, Gwen turned to him, her curiosity finally getting the better of her. Are you a mutant? Like Dr. Banner? She had wanted to ask for a long time. But she'd never had the chance. Hawk met her curious gaze and let out a short, incredulous laugh. He shook his head. I can guarantee you, I am 100% pure human. He had just awakened his Cosmo. That's all. A mutant. He would never admit to that. Mutation was a crutch for the weak. He was strong because he had made himself strong. He had earned his power through 1,000 days of relentless, backbreaking effort. The sweat from 1,000 days of 10,000 punches had finally watered the flower of his potential. Hawk paused for a moment, then looked at Gwen and added, I'm definitely not a mutant like the Spider Freak. And don't lump me in with Bruce Banner. Quote. Gwen's eyes lit up, seizing on the key part of his statement. The Spider Freak, you mean Spider-Man. He's a mutant, too. Hawk just blinked, then raised a hand to his mouth and mimed zipping his lips. My lips are sealed, Gwen. Fine, don't tell me. I'll figure it out myself. Gwen rolled her eyes. Just then. Beep, beep, beep. The half-hour analysis was complete. The machine chimed, signaling it was finished. Gwen hurried over and took the printout from the machine. Hawk leaned over her shoulder to look. He saw it immediately. Red blood cell count, white blood cell count, platelet count, every value was completely off the charts. Hawk blinked. The results were about what he'd expected. The path of the saint was the path of perfecting the self. Gwen scanned the report, then took a deep breath and looked up at him. Hawk, do you have any idea what would happen if the outside world ever found out about this? Hawk just smiled. He looked her straight in the eye. Gwen, No one else is going to get a sample of my blood that easily. Quote. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. If you're interested, you can read advanced chapters. Web links. Bonus chapter every 100 ps. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 15 comments 0 vote. 50 Dr. Connors gives up on being human. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Why had Hawk worked so hard to become this strong? Wasn't it for this? The power to control his own destiny. And now, some random guy thinks they can just take his blood. Hey. In their dreams. That had been Gwen. If it had been anyone else, Hawk would have blasted their head clean off their shoulders the instant the needle came near. But Gwen ignored Hawk's quip. Her eyes were glued to the analysis report that had just printed out. Others might not have been able to make sense of it, but she could. And because she could, she drew in a sharp, astonished breath. Hawk's blood work was completely off the charts. His white blood cell count was maxed out on the machine's display, which meant the real number was probably even higher. And that meant one thing: Hawk's immune system was terrifyingly powerful and efficient. It could likely identify and eradicate any foreign invader, viruses, bacteria, parasites, almost instantly. It also explained his incredible healing factor. Gwen thought back to the day of the lab accident, how she had seen Hawk's hand bleeding, only for the wound to vanish moments later. And the other metrics. To put it simply, if Gwen hadn't drawn the blood from Hawk's finger herself, she would have assumed the data was fabricated. These were not the numbers of a human being. I saw Captain America's blood analysis once, leaked online, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Hawk, your numbers are even more insane than his. Did you take the super soldier serum? Gwen looked up at him. Having ruled out mutation, it was the only other logical explanation. But, unfortunately for her theory, Hawk just shrugged. Nope. Okay then. Gwen didn't press. She decisively took the report, tore it into tiny pieces, and then began to methodically wipe down the entire machine, inside and out. She rinsed the test vial under running water 3 times, then took the soaking, pulpy shreds of paper and buried them at the bottom of the trash can. She was making absolutely sure that no trace of the report or the blood sample could ever be found. Hawk watched her work, a small smile playing on his lips. A little paranoid, aren't we, Gwen? Not paranoid enough. Gwen's expression was dead serious. If anyone ever saw these numbers, Hawk, I have no doubt that they would put you on a dissection table. Hawk's eyebrow arched. That's assuming they could catch me. They were welcome to try. Because Hawk wouldn't mind turning their try into a die. He had already crossed that line. Killing wasn't a question of if for him anymore. It was only a question of how many. But Hawk's confidence didn't seem to reassure Gwen. Her expression remained grave. Hawk. Yeah, never, ever let anyone else get a sample of your blood. All right. Seeing the genuine fear and concern in her eyes, Hawk relented and nodded. The stern look on Gwen's face softened slightly. As they started walking out of the lab, she changed the subject. So, what now? About what? About Dr. Connors. Not our problem. Hawk shrugged. We didn't cause him to turn into a giant lizard. For all we know, he's already halfway to Mexico by now. Gwen considered it, then nodded. That's possible. Let's drop it. What class do you have this afternoon? French. You. Geography. The two of them walked out of the Stark Industries research building, chatting about their schedules. And just like that, 3 days passed. The media frenzy over the lizard monster had started to die down. After that one appearance on the Williamsburg Bridge, the creature hadn't been seen again. The general consensus was that it had either been secretly captured by the military or had fled the city. New York's friendly neighborhood Spider-Man thought so, too. But in reality, the lizard had never left. At this very moment, he was holed up in a maintenance tunnel just 5 blocks from Midtown Tech. The New York City sewer system had service platforms at regular intervals. The lizard had made one of them his temporary lair. But right now, he was no longer the lizard. He was just Dr. Connors again. Yet, after experiencing what it was like to be whole, to be immensely powerful, a hulking, monstrous beast, how could he be content to revert to a frail, crippled man once the dose wore off? Maybe, at first, his only intention had been to stop the board of directors from experimenting on those poor, wounded soldiers. But now, Dr. Connors had seen the light. Being human was fine. But being the lizard, being stronger, faster, and more powerful than any human, that was true freedom. And so, Dr. Connors made a decision. He wasn't going to be a man anymore. He was going to be the lizard. Permanently. To do that, he first needed to figure out why that one mouse had been a success. For 3 days, he had been rewatching the security footage from his lab. And finally, as the hypnotic, low-frequency hum of the sewer's power conduits buzzed in his ears, Dr. Connors, covered in sweat and grime, saw it. His eyes widened as he froze the frame on his laptop screen. On the screen was the mouse, licking a drop of blood from the floor. Connors frantically rewound the footage. He found the moment. It was right after Hawk had pulled his hand away from Gwen. Hawk. It was him. A tremor ran through Dr. Connors's body, not of fear, but of manic excitement. He had been on good terms with the boy. He had given him a letter of recommendation. Surely, if he just called and asked, Hawk would give him a small sample of his blood for research. That was his first thought. That was what he would do. But just as he reached for his phone, a voice that was both inside his head and echoing in the darkness around him, hissed into his thoughts. No. He will never give it to you. A man with blood that powerful would never share it. Quote. Dr. Connors's eyes glazed over as the whisper slithered through his mind. Yes, he'll never give it to me, he would never. What do I do? Gwen. Take the girl. She is his weakness. Take the girl, and force him to give you the blood. You're right, take Gwen, force him. Dr. Connors's eyes now completely vacant, he muttered the words to himself as his hand closed around the 3 remaining vials of the regeneration serum. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 4 comments 0 vote. 51 The Lizard Strikes Again bonus. Thank you for the 1500 PS milestone, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. It's Peter, isn't it? Quote. In the middle of physics class. Hawk glanced at the words on the note that had been slid onto his desk, a single eyebrow arching. He looked over at Gwen, who was sitting next to him. Gwen just gave him a pointed look, her eyes flicking to the note. Hawk offered a small, noncommittal smile and slid the note back to her. He wasn't confirming anything. Gwen figuring it out on her own was one thing. Him admitting it was another. Just as he'd said before, he wasn't going to betray Peter's secret, just as Peter hadn't betrayed his. After class ended, Gwen walked with Hawk down the hall toward their lockers, her mind still turning over Spider-Man identity. It had to be Peter. Hawk's social circle was practically non-existent. And then there was Peter's own transformation, from a perennial victim to someone who could suddenly stand up for himself. Most of the students just assumed it was because he had started training with Hawk. That was how the rumor that Peter was Hawk's only friend had started. But Gwen knew better. She knew for a fact that Peter's newfound strength hadn't come from training with Hawk, and that was precisely why she was still hesitant. It felt too simple. It was like a slacker and a genius taking the same test. The slacker sees a question, thinks, oh, I know this one, it's A, and fills in the bubble without a second thought. But the genius looks at the same obvious answer and pauses, thinking. Is this a trick question? That was Gwen's dilemma. She was almost certain Spider-Man was Peter, but without seeing it with her own eyes, she couldn't be 100% sure. A moment later, Hawk opened his locker, tossed his physics book inside, and pulled out his backpack. I'm heading to Mrs. Snow's office. Okay. Gwen, who had just grabbed her own bag, nodded. I'll go to the library and wait for you there. Hawk grunted in agreement, slung his bag over his shoulder, and headed for the administration building. The weekend was tomorrow, but Monday was the 10th. If he wanted to take the day off, he had to request it today. Asking for it on Monday morning would be asking for forgiveness, not permission. Gwen, meanwhile, walked toward the library. Tomorrow was the homecoming dance. She had to meet with the planning committee and finalize the details. She wasn't actually going to the dance herself. For her, studying had always been more important. But as the grade's student aide, she was still responsible for making sure it all went smoothly. Although she and Hawk hadn't made their relationship public, she found herself wanting him to be her prom date this year. She just didn't know if he would say yes. He might. Maybe. Hopefully. She thought, a hint of uncertainty in her mind. Just as Hawk and Gwen went their separate ways in the crowded hallway, one heading for the offices, the other for the library, something was stirring deep beneath their feet. Down below. In the filthy, reeking, slime-coated sewers, the sound of reptilian hissing grew louder. A massive, lizard-like creature surged through the wastewater like an Olympic swimmer, then, with a great splash, launched itself out of the muck and onto a concrete platform at a four-way intersection of pipes. Midtown High. Gwen Stacy. Capture her. Use her against Hawk. HSSSSSSSSSs. The words burned into his mind like a demonic whisper. The lizard, now fully transformed, swept its reptilian eyes across the area while its forked, scarlet tongue flicked out to taste the air. It caught a scent. With a guttural roar, it shot forward like a blur, diving into another sewer pipe. It scrambled on all fours like a true reptile, racing through the filthy tunnel toward Midtown High, and the student bathrooms. A freshman, new to the trials of high school, was sitting on a toilet, scrolling through his phone. Suddenly, the kid, his face dotted with the acne of adolescence, felt something wrong. The ground was trembling. An inexplicable, cold draft was rising from below, chilling him in a place the sun didn't shine. The freshman was confused. What the hell? An earth cue. Boom. A powerful force erupted from below, launching him and the entire toilet upwards and out of the stall. Crash. The kid, still attached to his porcelain throne, landed in a heap on the bathroom floor, completely stunned. The few other students in the bathroom stared, frozen, at the boy who had just been shot out of the stall like a cannonball. But their shock quickly turned to terror. In the now doorless stall, the floor was cracking apart. A green, scaled claw shot up, its talons striking sparks against the ceramic tiles. The next second, hiss SSSSS. The lizard hauled itself out of the hole in the floor. It stood tall, spread its arms wide, and let out a triumphant roar, announcing its arrival. Thwip. Huh. Peter, who had just finished his chemistry class and was back at his locker, suddenly looked down at his arm. The hairs were standing straight up. Before he could even process what was happening, a series of terrified screams shattered the calm of the hallway. Ah! Oh my god, it's the lizard. Run. Mommy, I don't wanna go to school anymore. The bathroom door burst open. The students from inside came sprinting out, their faces masks of pure terror, shouting warnings as they fled in Peter's direction. Bringing up the rear was the kid from the stall, still fumbling with his unfastened pants. He was too scared to even notice. It was clear he was traumatized. He probably wouldn't be able to use a public restroom alone for a very long time. Just as the other students in the hall turned to look at the commotion. Boom. The entire wall of the bathroom exploded outwards. And the lizard's monstrous form was revealed to everyone. Holy shit. It's the lizard. Quote. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. # bonus chapter every 100 ps. # if you like the story, please leave a review. # add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators' thoughts. 3 comments 0 vote. 52, Spider-Man vs. the Lizard. Bonus. Thank you for the 1500 PS milestone, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. After a few days of quiet, the lizard, a topic that had already started to fade from student gossip, made a dramatic return. Most students had been fascinated by the news reports, eagerly discussing every detail about the creature. But now, with the lizard standing right in front of them, their reaction was universally, predictably, the same. Screams. Panic. In an instant, the peaceful quiet of the student lounge was shattered. But, a short distance away, in the main administration building, it was still a picture of tranquility. The staff here were completely unaware of the chaos unfolding outside. Especially in Mrs. Snow's office. Mrs. Snow wasn't surprised by Hawk's request to leave early. He took a personal day on September 10th every year. This time was no different. Hawk, having gotten his absence excused, was about to leave when Mrs. Snow called out to him. He stopped at the door and turned back. Mrs. Snow was smiling. So, I hear you and Gwen are together now. Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm so glad you finally listened to your heart. Her voice was filled with genuine happiness. If Gwen could see the invisible wall Hawk used to put up, then of course Mrs. Snow, who had seen more of life than Hawk had seen of the world, could see it too. But unlike Gwen, Mrs. Snow saw the whole picture. After all, she knew Hawk just as well as she knew Gwen. Otherwise, she wouldn't have thought to look for Gwen whenever Hawk went missing. So, her tone became wistful. I was starting to think you two would never get past that awkward stage before graduation. But I'm curious, who made the first move? Hawk looked at his suddenly gossipy, but clearly caring, guidance counselor. He thought for a moment. Gwen did. That's what I figured. Mrs. Snow nodded, then smiled warmly at Hawk. Hawk, there's some advice I've been wanting to share with you. I was saving it for your graduation. She paused, her expression kind. There is no shame in a humble beginning. True strength lies in being able to bend without breaking. I was going to give that to you at graduation if you hadn't changed, but it seems you don't need it anymore. Just as she'd said, she understood Gwen, and she understood Hawk. Hawk listened to her words and gave a sincere nod. Thank you. Mrs. Snow then added, can I offer you one more piece of advice, Hawk? He nodded. Of course. He couldn't speak for other students, but his guidance counselor was one of the best. Her concern for him was real, and he always took her advice seriously. Mrs. Snow smiled. Prom. Huh. Hawk raised an eyebrow. I know you don't like those kinds of things, she said, but prom is different. If you can, you shouldn't miss it. And of course, take your date. That way, years from now, when you look back on your high school experience, it won't just be an empty space. Right. Going to prom with Gwen. That actually sounded pretty good. As Mrs. Snow spoke, an image of the prom flashed in Hawk's mind. A handsome couple. Music and dancing. Limos and champagne. Ah. Hawk snapped back to reality, pushing the thought aside. He gave Mrs. Snow a genuine smile. Okay, Mrs. Snow. I'll think about it. Satisfied with his answer, she smiled back. Hawk was about to leave for good. But just then, bong, the office door flew open. A staff member poked his head in, his voice frantic. There's an emergency. We have to go, now. Mrs. Snow froze. Hawk's brow furrowed. 1 minute later. Hawk emerged from the administration building and stopped, staring at the scene unfolding in the distance. Students were pouring out of the emergency exits of the main school building in a panicked flood. What the hell? Is there a school shooting at Midtown now? Run. It's the lizard. He's here. Run. Students, this way. The lizard. Hawk caught the word of the fastest runner. He immediately opened up his senses, which he normally kept suppressed. If he didn't, the constant sensory overload would drive him insane. The moment he did, the sounds from inside the school building flooded in, screams, guttural roars, the sounds of fighting, and the telltale thwip of a web shooter. Thwip. Crash. In the middle of the chaos, Peter, who had quickly changed in a bathroom, was in the thick of a fight. The lizard caught him with a vicious swipe of its claws, hurling him across the hall. The claws also snagged Peter's backpack, ripping it from his shoulders. Peter Parker. The lizard's eyes fell on the name tag on the backpack. A flicker of recognition crossed its reptilian face. It looked up at Peter, who was already getting to his feet after crashing into a wall. Peter Parker. The boy with no mother, and no father. Peter didn't answer. He just charged forward again. But the lizard's tail shot out, wrapped around a row of lockers, and swung them like a club, slamming into Peter and sending him flying. Thump. 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 Peter hit the ground and tumbled hard, smashing through the main entrance doors and rolling out onto the lawn. With a furious roar, the lizard's massive frame tore the rest of the doorway apart as it burst outside. The next second, before the lizard could even steady itself, Peter planted his hands on the grass, launched himself into the air, and delivered a powerful kick that slammed into the creature's side like a cannonball, sending it flying back into the school building. The sounds of fighting and shattering walls erupted from inside once again. Hawk was already running toward the library. He didn't know why the lizard had shown up at Midtown, but it wasn't his problem. Peter was on the scene. He could handle it. As Hawk entered the library, he immediately spotted Gwen, who was hurrying down from the second floor with a crowd of other students. Gwen. Hawk. She saw him and rushed to meet him at the bottom of the stairs. What's happening? Hawk was about to answer. Crash. He instinctively looked up. The lizard crashed through the second floor window with Peter clinging to its back, webs wrapped tight around its massive frame. It paid him no attention. And then, with its claws outstretched, it lunged straight down at Hawk and Gwen. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators thoughts. 4 comments 0 vote. 53, 1 punch, the lizard bonus. Thank you for 1600 power stones, here's your bonus chapter. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. The monstrous lizard. A dangling Spider-Man. And a dumbstruck Gwen. Hawk didn't have time to think. He grabbed Gwen, but in that same instant, a realization hit him. He yanked her back, pulling her into his arms and spinning on the spot, turning his own back toward the lizard. Crack. The lizard's claws slammed into Hawk's back with the force of a falling boulder, knocking him clean off the staircase. In midair, Hawk twisted again, taking the impact as his back crashed into a bookshelf below. The shelf splintered into pieces. It all happened in a flash. By the time anyone else reacted, the library was filled with a new wave of screams as students scrambled for the exit. Hawk. The lizard, perched on the stairs like a true monster, let a low growl rumble in its throat as it stared down at Hawk, who was already getting to his feet. Blood. Give it to me. Okay. So he's here for me. Hawk, who felt nothing from the blow other than some dust on his now disheveled clothes, made a mental note. He instinctively glanced at Gwen, who was also snapping out of her shock. Are you hurt? He was curious about something, though. If the lizard was after him, why did that last attack seem like it was aimed directly at Gwen? It wasn't just a feeling. It was an instinct. If the lizard had been aiming for him, it wouldn't have even come close. To think otherwise would be an insult to the 2.5 years of brutal training he'd endured. Hawk's first impulse had been to grab Gwen and exit the scene at supersonic speed. But the moment he considered it, a series of consequences flashed through his mind. Gwen's body wouldn't be able to withstand the sudden G-force. The G-force would crush her like an invisible hand. Or the fatal air resistance would have torn her apart. His body was built for supersonic movement, Gwen's wasn't. That was why he had changed his plan in that split second, choosing to absorb the lizard's attack instead. It had nothing to do with not wanting to expose his powers in front of his classmates. He wasn't afraid of being exposed. And he certainly wasn't interested in playing dumb to get the upper hand. Even when he robbed the Quantico base, the most he'd done for a disguise was wear a hoodie and a surgical mask. He hadn't even worn gloves. If the military had done a thorough investigation, they probably could have found him. After all, he hadn't worn any disguise when he'd scouted the place during the day. A simple check of security footage and some motion tracking would be enough to get a match. In short, if he wasn't afraid of being exposed to the United States military, he sure as hell didn't care about a bunch of students. He just didn't want Gwen to get hurt. Gwen, who had now fully recovered from the shock, instinctively shook her head. I'm fine, she said, before her eyes suddenly widened in alarm. Look out. Whoosh. Hawk threw a punch. The sheer force of the air pressure slammed into the desk the lizard had flung with its tail, and the desk disintegrated in midair. Be careful. He's incredibly strong. The warning came from Peter, who was now clinging to the wall like an actual spider. To be more precise, the lizard was absurdly strong. If the lizard's strength on the Williamsburg Bridge had been a 1, its strength now was a 3. Fortunately, Peter healed fast. But while he knew Hawk was strong, he'd never actually seen him fight. Seeing that Hawk was about to jump in, he had to give him a warning. The voice Peter was using wasn't his own. Compared to his normal voice, this one was deeper, more guttural. The change was enough to make Gwen glance up for a second, but she quickly turned back to Hawk and nodded. You be careful. I will. Hawk gave her a reassuring smile. Gwen turned, ready to run for cover. But the instant she turned her back, the lizard's pupils contracted. It kicked off the stairs, launching itself through the air, once again, straight at Gwen. Holy shit. You're dead. The first line was from Peter. Seeing the attack, he dug his hands and feet into the wall and fired 2 streams of webbing, which latched onto the airborne lizard's back, halting its forward momentum for a fraction of a second. The second line was from Hawk. Seeing the lizard try to kill Gwen right in front of him, his voice turned to ice. The next second, boom. A sonic boom ripped through the library. Hawk vanished from his spot, reappearing in the air directly in front of the lizard. He threw a single, almost casual punch that landed squarely on the creature's chest. Crack. The lizard's chest caved in, instantly exposing the mutated heart within. His body shot backward like a kite with its string cut, a brutal shriek tearing from its throat. Peter was sent flying with him. His 2 web lines were still attached to the lizard's back. The force of Hawk's punch pulled him from the wall, and he let out a startled yell as he was dragged along for the ride. Luckily, he reacted instantly, severing the web lines. He did a quick flip in midair, and all 4 limbs slapped against the library ceiling, absorbing the momentum. The lizard was not so fortunate. Crash, crash, crash. It flew backward, plowing through an entire row of bookshelves on the 2nd floor. With a final, thunderous series of impacts, its back slammed into the far wall. The wall spider webbed with cracks, finally stopping its momentum. It had all happened in the blink of an eye. After sending the lizard flying, Hawk reappeared next to Gwen. Are you okay? Gwen just stared, shaking her head numbly. Her mind was stuck on the image of the airborne monster lunging at her. Peter dropped from the ceiling, landing on the wrecked 2nd floor amidst the shattered bookshelves and cracked floorboards. He saw the state the lizard was in. He stared. The lizard's chest was completely caved in. Shards of its own ribs were embedded in its exposed, mutated heart. The heart was still beating, thump thump, but the rhythm was slowing, and the creature's green scales were visibly fading back to pale skin. 1 punch. 54. The lizard, deceived by the devil. Bonus. Things are about to get interesting from the next chapter onward. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. By the time Hawk and Gwen made it to the 2nd floor, the lizard was gone. In its place was Dr. Connors, reverted to his human form. But the wound in his chest remained, a gaping, irreversible injury. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, but as he saw Hawk approaching, he forced a painful smile. Thank you. Quote. Hawk said nothing, just raised an eyebrow as he looked at the dying man. Gwen, however, was still trying to understand. Doctor, why did you try to kill me? She couldn't make sense of it. If Connors was angry about what happened on the Williamsburg Bridge, he should have been after Spider-Man. If he was after blood, he should have gone after Hawk. Why her? Leaning against the wall, completely drained of strength, Connors let out a weak, wheezing laugh. The movement made his chest heave, and a flush of red spread across his pale face. He coughed up blood, his breathing growing dangerously shallow. As his eyes began to flutter shut for the last time, Dr. Connors whispered his final words. I don't know. I think the devil made me do it. I'm so sorry. Thud. With that final, strained apology, his eyes closed completely. His lone left arm slapped against the floor with a hollow, final sound. Dr. Connors was dead. Hawk's gaze shifted from the body to Peter standing nearby. Are you going to leave or what? Peter, who was still reeling from the shock of seeing Connors killed with a single punch, snapped back to reality. What about you? The spider freak killed him. What's that got to do with me? I'm not a spider freak. Then the webs. I'm leaving. Peter cut the conversation short. He turned, fired a web, and swung through the air, shattering the glass of the skylight with the tip of his boot before disappearing from sight. Just then, Gwen's eyes went wide. The security cameras. She grabbed Hawk's arm and started pulling him toward the library's security office downstairs. Don't worry. They didn't see anything. The angle where I hit him was a blind spot. They'll only see the lizard flying backward, not who did it. It was probably just a coincidence. He honestly didn't care if he was exposed or not, he hadn't known it was a blind spot when he threw the punch. He only realized it afterward. Maybe, just maybe, God, if he existed, had decided it wasn't his time to be revealed. Half an hour later. The NYPD had arrived and were carrying out the body of Dr. Connors, which was already cold to the touch. Captain George Stacy of the 19th Precinct was on the scene. Gwen. The moment he got out of his car, he rushed over and pulled her into a tight hug. Thank God, you're okay. Dad. Gwen eased out of his embrace, glanced at Hawk, then took his hand. Hawk saved me. George's eyes turned to Hawk. Hawk gave a polite, familiar greeting. Mr. Stacy. Thank you. This time, George didn't ignore him. He looked him straight in the eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of gratitude. Hawk smiled. I just did what I had to. George said nothing, but his eyes darted for a split second to where his daughter's hand was firmly intertwined with Hawk's. He looked back at Gwen. Call your mother. She was worried sick when she saw the news about the attack at Midtown. Gwen gasped, realizing she'd forgotten. She quickly pulled out her phone and stepped away to call her mom. Once she was gone, George stood beside Hawk, looking toward the body bag being loaded into the coroner's van. So, the lizard was Dr. Connors. But what was he doing at the school? Hawk's expression didn't change. I don't know. But he was thinking about Connors's last words. The devil made me do it. What kind of devil would convince Connors to ignore Spider-Man, the one he had a grudge against, and ignore Hawk, whose blood he supposedly needed, just to make a beeline for the completely harmless Gwen Stacy? It made no sense. Unless this devil wasn't playing by the usual rules. A moment later, Gwen returned, visibly relieved after talking to her mother. She walked right up to Hawk and naturally looped her arm through his. All clear with Mom. George's eye twitched almost imperceptibly at the casual gesture. He decided it was time to leave. If he stayed any longer, he might just shoot the kid. Another half hour passed. After the NYPD and Captain Stacy had cleared out, Midtown Tech announced that school was dismissed for the day. The students, who had still been buzzing with the aftershock of the Spider-Man vs. Lizard battle, immediately erupted into cheers. Praising the school's wise decision, they bolted for the parking lot like wild horses breaking free from a pen. Hawk just shook his head, deciding to stop wasting time thinking about Connors's motives. The man was dead. Dwelling on it was pointless. That weekend, Hawk was in his apartment, surfing the web on the laptop he'd bought from Sky, connected to the hotspot from the phone his girlfriend had given him. He finally had some downtime and decided to look for a way to sell the 5 Chidori weapons he had stashed under his bed. He had to. He needed to make some money. Otherwise, he wouldn't even be able to afford a tux for prom. Theoretically, he didn't need to worry about money anymore. But, when the original Spider-Man had been corrupted by the symbiote, the darkest thing he did was buy himself a cheap suit. Hawk knew he wasn't as morally upright as Peter, but he couldn't be that much worse, could he? As he was searching for a black market connection, a soft thump sounded at his window. Hawk looked up. Clinging to the fire escape outside his window, peering in, was the very Spider-Man he had just been thinking about. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. Bonus chapter every 100 PS. If you like the story, please leave a review. Add to library. If you're enjoying the story, please drop some power stones, they really help with new chapter releases. A short review would also be deeply appreciated. Thanks for reading. DragonnX creators thoughts. 16 comments 0 vote. 55, an eye for an eye. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. I have some good news to share. Starting from chapter 72, the chapters will be longer, almost double the usual length. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. The sewer walls were slick with a sticky, unidentifiable slime, and the stench, a foul mix of rust, raw sewage, and rot, filled the tunnel. Hawk shut off his sense of smell entirely. Heat was manageable. Cold was nothing. But this kind of stench, this was his kryptonite. He looked at the masked figure leading the way through the muck, a genuine curiosity in his voice. How in the world did you find this place? I followed the lizards, Peter explained, his own voice muffled by his mask, likely a welcome filter against the overwhelming stench. It's just up ahead. Around this corner. During their fight at the school 2 days ago, he'd noticed some of the smaller lizards scrambling out of the sewer grates. With nothing better to do on his weekend, Peter had decided to investigate. He'd spent the better part of a day navigating the labyrinthine sewer system until, finally, he had found it. Dr. Connors's temporary lab. His first thought had been of Hawk, figuring he would be interested. And so, he had swung by his apartment and invited him on a weekend adventure into the New York underground. Soon, they rounded the corner and saw it. A bird's nest of spliced wires, held in place by gobs of some unidentifiable slime, ran up the wall, powering a few bare light bulbs. The weak light illuminated a makeshift lab, 2 laptops and an assortment of scientific equipment scattered across a table. Hawk stepped onto the platform, his eyes scanning the setup. So where's this video you were talking about? Here. Peter was already at one of the laptops. He typed a few commands, and a video file opened on the screen. Static. That blood, it has to be Hawk's. I should call him. Static. No, he'd never give it to me. Static. Wait. Gwen. I can take Gwen. Force Hawk to give me his blood. Static. Yes, that's it. I'll take the girl. Then he'll have no choice. Get Gwen. On the screen, Dr. Connors looked like a man possessed. His clothes were filthy, his hair matted to his head with sweat. He paced and muttered to himself, his image flickering with static. In the final moments of the video, his eyes wild with a feverish desperation, Connors grabbed the last 3 vials of the regenerative serum and plunged them into his own body. A series of guttural, inhuman roars ripped from his throat, and in a final, agonizing transformation, the lizard was born. The video ended there. A strange, almost amused expression crossed Hawk's face. So, this was the reason the lizard had been hunting Gwen. It was all to capture her and force him to hand over his blood. The logic was so twisted, so utterly insane, that Hawk could only come to one conclusion. The lizard serum completely fried his brain. Would you have given it to him? What? Hawk looked at Peter. Peter's question was genuine. If Connors had just called you and asked for your blood, would you have given it to him? Hawk's brow furrowed slightly. Would he have? Hawk considered it for a moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. A small amount, yes. Why? Peter's eyes widened behind his mask. I don't know what's so special about your blood, but it was obviously the key to him becoming the lizard. Knowing what would happen, you'd still give it to him. Hawk looked at Peter, his voice calm and even. Him using my blood to become the lizard would have been his choice. Me giving it to him would have been mine. Peter just shook his head. I don't get it. You and I, we both grew up without parents. But yours existed. You had them, and you still have your aunt and uncle. Me, I'm an orphan. Always have been. That's why you can be a hero, Peter. And why I never can be. Why not? I'm not as good a person as you are, Hawk said with a small, self-aware smile. But I'm not evil, either. I just live by a simple code. A kindness must be repaid, and a wrong must be avenged. When I was let go from Oscorp, it had nothing to do with Dr. Connors. But he still wrote me that letter of recommendation. Even though the letter is useless to me now, when he wrote it, he had nothing to gain from it. That was a favor, freely given. So. Hawk's smile returned, this time with a hint of irony. A vial of blood. It's nothing to me. I would have given it to him. What he does with it, if he saves the world or burns it to the ground, that's on him. My conscience would be clear. Peter listened to Hawk's explanation, a thoughtful look on his face as he nodded slowly. A thought then occurred to Hawk. He looked at Peter. What? Are you interested in my blood now, too? I can give you a vial if you want. Peter's head snapped up, and he shook it vigorously. No, I'm good. All right then. Hawk chuckled, then scanned the platform one last time and shook his head. This is what I mean. His brain is fried. He could have just asked me for it. Instead, he did all this. Come on, let's go. Now that he knew Connors's motive, as insane as it was time to leave. Considering the doctor's mental state in that video, it almost made sense. The logic of a madman. You can no more predict the thoughts of the insane than you can predict the whims of a cat. Time to go. He still wanted to see if he could unload those 5 Chitauri weapons today, and this little field trip had already taken up half his day. Peter looked around the makeshift lab. What about all this? Hawk considered it. Burn it. Burn it. The man is dead. Let him rest. Besides, if we leave this stuff here, who knows what kind of monster might crawl out of it next. But it's your call. I don't really care either way. Quote. You're right. Peter thought for a moment, then nodded in agreement. Good. Then I'm leaving it to you, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Hawk gave him a mock salute, then turned and walked away without a backward glance, disappearing back into the darkness of the tunnels. After Hawk was gone, Peter took one last look around the lab, then left as well. He needed to find something to start a fire. And after they were both gone, on the platform, the tiny, blinking red light of a hidden camera went dark.